What's going on, boxing fans? Julian Williams here with the Distance. History of the Heavyweight Division, Volume 8. This one is the Joe Louis edition. I've already had a video on Joe Louis for my top 5 heavyweights, but anyway, this is I guess a different video in a different direction, kind of leading on to the next heavyweight champion of a certain specific era. So anyway, it's gonna have a little bit of James J. Braddock in there as well. But James J. Braddock defeated Max Baer in 1935, and he simply wore him down and won the fight. Max Baer, handpicked James J. Braddock, and why would he not pick him? He's a man with more than 40 losses, though he did defeat a couple quality contenders. Coming up, he was a man with many losses. I believe he had more than 20 losses before he faced Max Baer. And he was he's really what a journeyman. Everything pointed to journeyman when you thought of James J. Braddock. And the last thing that you would think was that this man would eventually become a heavyweight champion of the world someday. So James J. Braddock defeats Max Baer in 1935, and right after he defeats Max Baer, he fights a few exhibitions against a fighter by the name of Jack McCarthy. And he's supposed to fight Max Schmeling. Max Schmeling was the man who knocked out Joe Louis in like 12 rounds in his career in like 1935. Very early in his career. And Max Schmeling was pretty much the mandatory for the championship shot, was in line for the shot. And people to this day don't know why the fight was canceled. But the fight was canceled. They were scheduled to fight, and Schmeling stepped aside, and Joe Louis ended up stepping up and fighting James J. Braddock. And the rumor has it that he did fight Joe Louis for more money, but who knows? Because I think there was more money in fighting Joe Louis. And I think there'd be more of a legacy, and maybe more of a critical acclaim if he defeated a young Joe Louis the same way that Schmeling did. If he beat Louis at this time compared to Schmeling, because Louis was just coming back off of that loss and building himself back up. So James J. Braddock on, I believe, June 22nd, 1936 fought Joe Louis instead of Max Schmeling, and I believe there was a guarantee that the winner would go on to face Max Schmeling. And Louis had already faced Schmeling back in like 1935 and lost. So Joe Louis came in and he knocked out James J. Braddock in 8 rounds. So now this is setting up a fight, the rematch between Joe Louis and Max Schmeling. And the stories that I've heard, because I've heard stories from many people who have lived during this time. My grandfather was one of the main people that told me about this. He told me that about how culturally significant that Joe Louis was. Joe Louis, fought Max Schmeling in Yankee Stadium, and pretty much to a packed house, and defeated him in 1 round. And I remember my grandfather telling me about how him and my grandmother were sitting in front of the radio. That they had just gotten married. They were sitting in front of the radio and they were listening to the boxing match on the radio, and said that every radio station was playing the fight. And Joe Louis, after defeating Braddock, I haven't mentioned this, ended up becoming the second African American heavyweight champion. He had to conform to a lot of rules because of Jack Johnson. He pretty much, as I mentioned in my other video, he kind of had to pay for Jack Johnson's mistakes. So Joe Louis, he faces Max Schmeling, defeats Max Schmeling in 1 round, and he goes on and he has a very successful reign. 27 title defenses, 23 knockouts. Faced some quality heavyweights, and before he's a champion, he's facing former champions. I believe he faced Max Baer, and he faced Primo Carnera before he became the champion. Overall, quality names. to put on his resume. And years later, he continued fighting. He fought a fighter by the name of Arturo Godoy, and it was a split decision fight because the referee ruled it in Joe Louis' favor, to kind of break the tie. And he came back and he knocked him out in like 8 rounds. But he just continued fighting. Even fought Buddy Bayer, and I believe he fought Tony Galinto during his championship reign. And just continued fighting. 27 title defenses. And after 1941, he did have a busy 1941. After 1941, he became a little more of a part-time fighter. He didn't fight too often after 1941, because 1942 came, he fought like 2 fights. 1944 came, he fought like 1 or 2 in 46, and then he fought Jersey Joe Walcott. In my personal opinion, I do believe he lost the first fight to Jersey Joe Walcott. That's just my opinion. I think he lost that fight. And then he fought him again in the rematch, I believe. Fought him in a rematch. Or either that he fought Ezzard Charles. He fought Ezzard Charles, and he lost to Ezzard Charles, and that was the end of his reign. But Joe Louis was culturally significant, to boxing, because I believe he influenced a lot of black fighters, a lot of black athletes who wanted to get into the sport. Even influenced Sugar Ray Robinson, who we all consider the greatest fighter pound for pound to ever lace up a pair of gloves. So that means a lot to boxing. But the record speaks for itself. And really we don't know much about the contenders of that time. We really don't know much of the contenders of that time, because Joe Louis did practically face everybody that he could have faced. And the fight with Billy Conn was another significant fight, because he was facing the former light heavyweight champion, and Billy Conn was simply outboxing him in the first fight, and Joe Louis came, zeroed in, and knocked him out, because Billy Conn got brave and wanted to knock him out. So just imagine if his reign ended that way against Billy Conn in like I believe it was 44. It was in the 40s, 41, 44, one of those years. But I will continue with Ezzard Charles. So anyway, that was Distance. Thanks for watching. Peace.